Signy, for your
Thank you.
nice introduction. I'm very pleased to see you here today. I'll share a few memories that I have of my father working with Dali, and it's true that at the time, that was in the mid-60s, I was either a kid or a teenager, but I had the great chance to see Dali very often, as my father was at that time his major publisher. What does it mean? Well, publisher in that sense that he was a friend of Dali. He would go to Dali's house or to his hotel. They would speak for long hours on literature, and then they would choose a famous literature poem or novel, and Dali would illustrate this piece of literature. In that case, here we have legends, the legends of the mythology, the Greek mythology. We have also the surrealist bullfight, which was inspired by Picasso, and that Dali, quote, Dalenized. And I'll speak about that. And we have a few poems illustrated by Dali, which are coming from poems of Apollinaire, Ronsard, Faust, and the Faust of Goethe as well. So how did it start? My father had simply a passion for Dali and for his work. And this passion led him to meet many surrealists, many Dadaists and surrealists in the mid-30s in Paris. And they connected at that time, did incredible happening, you know, these joyful surprises that you would have as a gallerist, having something falling from the roof and appearing, transforming, and that was that time. And then the Second World War came, and unfortunately many surrealists left and went to New York, which was the case of Dali and of many others. There were hundreds of artists in New York during the Second World War. And my father reconnected with Dali in the, I would say, in the late 50s. And in the 60s, he started to work so much with Dali, he neglected other artists. He had really a fabulous connection with Dali. And that's mostly the works you see here from this time period of the 60s. Finally, in 1973, Dali decided not to work on copper plates like all these works which are presented here. And my father said, well, the quality of the works that we have in the collection is extraordinary. I'm not going to have lithograph or whatever screens or silk screens done after Dali's works, and I don't follow that process. So he stopped to work with Dali in 1973. For that reason, this collection has a very harmonious kind of quality, because that's the work of a decade here. And after that, Dali totally changed. So it's considered as one of the rare etchings that he did. And I'm very happy that some have been now presented in museums. Some are part of the museum collections, like the Dali Museum in Florida, like the Dali Museum in Spain. They have these two museums have all our collection. And a few museums like the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, to whom I offered 70 etchings recently. So I'm very happy that this collection is now open to the public. We had a great show together in Portland, I think 7 years ago, which was maybe much larger. Well, this collection is a diminishing resource, and with the time, we have less and less works that are becoming rare. And what is here is, I would say, a selection that we did so to show exactly what Dali was doing by intervals of maybe 3-4 years. There is a big difference For instance, the beginning of the 60s, like you have here, the Greek mythology, Dali was still working very much on all the details. If you look at all the details of all these etchings, they are incredible. Look at the Judgment of Paris, which is here, and you'll see in the back there is a kind of Renaissance, this sepia in black, Judgment of Paris, with three women. There is incredible details in the background, and Dali was at the same time innovating a lot. For instance, for the Medusa, which is the octopus here, on the low part of this wall, Dali took a real octopus from the seashore in front of his house, and this beautiful animal was placed in acid and printed on and went on the copper plate, and imprinted his shape, and from there Dali was challenged and designed Medusa. Medusa was supposed to be seduction and threat of death at the same time. So she carries a skull, and she's obviously seduction on the other side of her body. So Dali was always trying to invent new process, and in the copper plate and etching process, it's called a kitchen. So Dali had a very vast kitchen. He could use any kind of tools to create something new, and not only a dead octopus, but sometimes scissors, roulettes, all kind of tools, and create. By that way, he would create a new texture, something interesting for him. In this series, for instance, he used to throw acid on the copper plate first, kind of connecting in another way with Pollock that he had met in the US at the end of the Second War. But while Pollock was using the dripping, Dali threw the acid on the copper plates, and from there he would be challenged to do something. So that's the case of, for instance, the Theseus and Minotaurus. The shape kind of creates the labyrinth in which Theseus would find the bull at the end and would come back with the thread of Ariadne. Ariadne is presented on the top. When you can come closer to the work, you'll see that. I don't know if we have, for instance, yes, the Oedipus and Sphinx is a very interesting stain that Dali threw on the copper plate, and from there he created Oedipus and Sphinx. So it was like, if you wish, something like coffee that you try to read, and you read out of a shape and your imagination is challenged. And Dali loved that. So he would love also the mix of destiny in the stain. Well, it's something you cannot change afterwards. And his own...
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
I didn't
Very
mean
nice
to interrupt you, but
yeah.
Go ahead and take a break if you
Thank you.
need a little break.
Did you see him work?
Yeah, I saw him work many times. Excuse me, 2 seconds. I saw him work many times because, especially in that time, Dali had told my father, come to my house. He was in Spain, my father was in Paris, and I have a few works ready for you, copper plates like the one you saw on the side there. And when my father arrived 2 times, the plates were not there. So after a moment, my father said to Dali, what happens? You told me to come. And it was a long way to go to Spain and take the train and connect and reconnect and so on. And there was nothing. And Dali said, well, some collectors came yesterday. I sold them your plates. Wow, no, it's not possible. We have a contract. You cannot have the same mythology series presented here and there. And that was very upsetting for my father. So Dali wouldn't do that in a bad spirit. It was just because he had nothing else to sell, and he would sell that. So for that reason, my father decided that we would go during the summer each year for 2 months in front of Dali's house, where there was and is still a small inn, and we would stay there, and he would get his copper plates, and that would be safe. For that reason, I used to see Dali for many summers, every day.
So you were a model too, like that?
No, I was not a model. I was, child. But Dali was extremely kind and a very easygoing person. Not the persona he created and that you saw on television, and who was kind of created second persona. He was a very simple man, working a lot, but very humorous, always doing jokes and creating things. For instance, in his house, you would see in the living room an ashtray which was moving by itself. And then you look, and there was a stick, a sort of silver stick, and it was attached to the top of a tortoise. And the tortoise would walk in the house, these garden tortoises, and it would bring the ashtray to people in the living room. And there were things like that everywhere. It was fun.
So he
And
was a smoker.
I'm sorry?
He was a smoker.
Yeah, well,
Everybody was a smoker.
everybody.
How tall was he?
He was not that tall, but he was thin and elegant, and you would always expect him to be taller than he was. He was exactly my father's height. I don't know. I know in centimeters. I wouldn't know in feet.
But,
In feet, I don't know. He would be maybe a little bit that higher than me. So
You were what age then, 20?
no, well, yeah, I was between 6 and 17.
Oh, so you got
for a
your best
long
years.
time. For a
The
long
best
time.
years, yeah. So,
Christine, could you say a little bit about the tapestries and the sculpture
yes,
that
thank
you brought in? Thank you.
So in 1973, Dali was opening his museum in Spain, in Figueras. Some of you have been there, I heard. That's a beautiful museum. And my father decided to acquire a chateau near Paris, which was a very huge. The problem was that both of them, Dali and my father, didn't have very large-scale works. Dali, because he had sold all his paintings to these people, this couple, the Morse, who have created the Dali Museum in St. Petersburg in Florida, and my father, who had only etchings and drawings. So they were thinking about that, and suddenly Dali said, what about real tapestries, not printed tapestries, the hand-woven, long-to-do tapestries. So my father did a research and went to Aubusson in the center of France, where they weave exactly in the same way than they were doing centuries ago. And they started with this idea of doing tapestries. So 2 were done of each selected topic, one for Dali's museum and one for my father's museum. And then they went on 6 tapestries of each, as it is usually always done. There are always 6 tapestries. So it's what you see here. There are 2 of them, which are interesting. One is a bullfight, the burning giraffe. What Dali brought is something quite extraordinary. He wanted to work on Picasso's bullfight series, and Picasso himself, before him, had worked on and reinterpreted Goya. So it's a very interesting filiation from Goya to Picasso and then Dali. What Dali brought is a humorous touch. He didn't like the bullfights, not at all. When Goya and Picasso would go quite often and would appreciate that game, Dali didn't. And Dali would find it very barbaric, and he would like to make fun of it. So he brought fantastic and non-existing situations like the burning giraffe, and mainly in some of those etchings he's showing the audience who is represented often by dots like Picasso did, but then they transform into animals with horns. So the bulls are the audience, meaning the most primitive are the audience. And sometimes Dali represents himself as the bull. So he's the one, the poor bull, who is put to death. So he's playing mostly with this idea. That's the idea of the bullfight series, and I would come back on some of the details if you wish later. The other one is the Flower Woman. Dali in the late 60s worked on the subject of the hippies. He was very interested by the hippie movement, the love and peace years, and he would see a parallel between the Europeans during the Middle Ages going to Santiago of Compostela or Jerusalem barefooted and in a spiritual quest, and the hippies going to Kathmandu, sometimes barefooted as well, and going for months on the roads until India. And what he brought is a parallel in those two quests, but a sort of happiness also in those years where it symbolized freedom and the mix of different cultures. For instance, you will see in some of the works, the hippies which are here, you would see people with a sort of Asian costume, and people, Westerners, you would see Don Quixote, and you would see guitarists of the hippie movement with electric hair, and that's a very beautiful and joyful series. And the Flower Women, which have been done into tapestries, is one of these beautiful etchings, translated. So how is it translated? The artist would reproduce a carton, what we call a cartoon, which is a drawing with all the details for the tapestry at the real size of the tapestry. So this real size was chosen by Dali, and it has been reproduced, interpreted more than reproduced, I should say, translated into tapestry, which is absolutely not easy, because the weaver has to give the feeling of gouache, or the feeling of ink, of drawing into a tapestry. It's extremely difficult, and each of them is a different interpretation. Even if there are, for instance, 6 tapestries done on one topic, each of them will have slight differences, because each weaver will have a different translation of the work. So it's a unique work, and it's very interesting for that.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Absolutely
and it's
beautiful.
hand woven, so
Stunning.
it takes months and years to do. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are very welcome. So if you have any questions, I would be very happy to come with you next to some of those works and
Yes, and thank you
speak
so
about
much.
it.
You will not find a better expert on the series of the Argillet collection.